In the heart of Atlanta, where the bustling city streets met the quiet hum of suburban life, Pastor Jamal Henderson's church stood as a beacon of faith for its growing congregation. The church, Grace Community Fellowship, was known not only for its powerful sermons, but also for the warm and loving family atmosphere that surrounded it. Jamal, a charismatic man in his late 40s, was the rock of the community. His wife, Michelle Henderson, was often by his side, an image of grace and elegance. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect marriage, a storm was brewing. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Michelle, who had been experiencing sharp groin pains for several days, finally decided to visit her husband's longtime doctor, Dr. Alan Moore. She hesitated at first. After all, who would expect a pastor's wife to have such private concerns? But the pain had grown unbearable. The doctor's office was a few blocks away from the church, and Michelle drove herself there, trying to maintain composure. Dr. Moore had been the Henderson family's doctor for years, trusted and dependable. When Michelle described her symptoms, he recommended a thorough examination to rule out anything serious. He was professional, calm, and comforting, assuring her it was just a precautionary measure. But when he conducted the exam, something unusual caught his attention. A used condom was found inside her. Michelle was shocked, mortified even. She quickly explained that it wasn't possible. She hadn't been intimate with anyone but Jamal, but the evidence was clear, and the doctor was now in a moral and legal quandary. After the examination, Dr. Moore did the only thing he could think of. He called the police. Detective Lisa Carter was assigned to the case. With years of experience working in the Atlanta Police Department, Carter had seen her fair share of complex cases, but something about this one felt different. She quickly realized that this wasn't just a case of infidelity. There was something deeper, something darker hidden beneath the surface. As she began her investigation, one question loomed in her mind. Who else was involved in this mystery, and how far would it go? Michelle sat quietly in her home, waiting for the inevitable, her thoughts a swirl of confusion and dread. Would the truth about her marriage, her life, and the dark secrets buried within it come to light? And would anyone believe her? The storm was about to break. Detective Lisa Carter arrived at the Henderson household early the next morning, the cool Atlanta air biting at her skin as she stepped out of her car. She was a seasoned investigator, but there was something unsettling about this case. Michelle Henderson, the pastor's wife, was an essential part of the community. To many, she was the epitome of grace, a role model who carried herself with dignity. And now she was caught in an ugly web of suspicion. Lisa knocked firmly on the door, her boots echoing on the porch. A few moments later, Michelle answered, her face pale, her eyes hollow from the night's lack of sleep. She had tried to maintain her composure, but the discovery of the condom inside her had broken something inside her, a piece of her identity, her trust, and her marriage. Detective Carter, Michelle greeted her, her voice soft, trembling. She stepped aside to let Lisa in, the weight of the conversation between them palpable. Mrs. Henderson, I need to understand what happened, Lisa said, her tone direct but not unkind. She had learned over the years that empathy, not just facts, was important when dealing with sensitive cases. I've already told Dr. Moore. I'm telling you the truth, Michelle began, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I haven't been with anyone else. Not ever. Only Jamal. Her voice wavered with each word, her grief obvious. Lisa took a seat at the kitchen table, her eyes scanning the room. It looked like a home that had been well maintained, clean, organized, and filled with personal touches. There was no sign of distress, no clues that would suggest anything was amiss. Yet Michelle's story didn't quite add up. Did you and your husband ever have problems in your relationship? Lisa asked cautiously. Michelle paused, her eyes flickering as though she was weighing her words. No, detective. We've had our ups and downs, like any couple, but we were fine. Jamal is the love of my life. I'd never do anything to hurt him. Lisa nodded slowly, not fully convinced. There was something in Michelle's voice, a certain hesitation, that told Lisa there was more to the story than she was letting on. After a long silence, Michelle spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. There's Something you need to know. She reached for a glass of water, her hands shaking slightly as she took a sip before continuing. I don't know if I can trust anyone with this, but there's a man from my past. Someone who could be connected to this. Lisa leaned forward, her instincts kicking in. This was the break she had been waiting for. Who is he? Michelle's gaze fell to the floor, her voice trembling. His name is Michael. We were together a long time ago before I met Jamal. I thought I'd put him behind me, but it seems he might have come back into my life without me even realizing. Lisa's mind began to race. The pieces were slowly starting to fit together. A man from Michelle's past who may have resurfaced. Someone who could be connected to the condom found inside her. This was a lead she couldn't ignore. But there were still so many questions. Was Michelle hiding something? Or was she truly the victim in this case? Lisa left the Henderson house with more questions than answers. The mention of Michael, however, was significant. She would need to track him down, find out who he was, and determine what role he might have played in all this. Back at the station, Lisa pulled up the file on Pastor Jamal Henderson. The name rang a bell. Jamal was well known in the city's religious community, frequently invited to speak at conferences and even involved in various charitable organizations. His reputation was impeccable, or so it seemed. But could he have known about Michelle's past with Michael? Was there something about their marriage that he hadn't shared with anyone? As Lisa dug deeper into the pastor's background, she discovered a pattern. Jamal had been traveling a lot in the weeks leading up to Michelle's hospital visit. Could his absence have been connected to the mysterious appearance of Michael in Michelle's life once again? Lisa knew she needed to tread carefully. This case was no longer just about a pastor's wife and a strange medical discovery. There were layers to this story, layers that could uncover more than anyone was prepared for. As Lisa began to connect the dots, she felt the weight of the case grow heavier. She couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was about to unfold in this seemingly perfect world. And somewhere in the tangled web of love, betrayal, and secrets, a murder was waiting to be revealed. The investigation was just beginning, and Michelle Henderson's life would never be the same again. Detective Lisa Carter's days grew longer as she dug deeper into the case. Each lead seemed to open more doors, but they were all leading her into a labyrinth of deceit, secrets, and hidden motives. The mention of Michael, Michelle Henderson's ex, had been the key to unlocking the next phase of the investigation. But who was Michael? And how did he fit into this web of suspicion? Lisa started by pulling up every record she could find on Michael. She scoured old police reports, social media, and even public records looking for any trace of the man Michelle had referred to so vaguely. She quickly discovered that Michael Simmons had a criminal history. His past included a few charges, mainly related to theft and assault, but nothing too severe. He had served some time in prison but was released on parole about 3 years ago. Since then, he had kept a low profile. The deeper Lisa looked, the more she realized that Michael's connection to Michelle might have been more complicated than Michelle had let on. According to a few of Michael's old acquaintances, Michelle had been the one to end the relationship, and it hadn't been a peaceful breakup. Michael had a reputation for being controlling and obsessive, a man who didn't handle rejection well. Lisa couldn't help but wonder, was Michael seeking revenge? Did he resurface after years of silence because he wanted something from Michelle? Or was he trying to wreck her life in some twisted way? She needed answers, and the only way to get them was to find Michael. It didn't take long before Lisa found out that Michael had been seen in Atlanta recently. A few of his old friends reported that he'd been hanging around some of the same spots where Michelle spent her time, places she frequented in her younger days. Lisa's suspicion deepened. Had Michael been watching her? Or worse, had he been closer to her than anyone realized? Lisa decided it was time to track him down. She contacted the parole officer assigned to Michael and learned that he had been violating some of the terms of his parole, drinking and not reporting to his officer regularly. That gave her the legal right to approach him, and she wasted no time in setting up an interview. The next morning, Lisa found herself standing outside a small, dilapidated apartment complex in a less than desirable part of Atlanta. This was where Michael Simmons had been living for the past several months, and as Lisa knocked on the door, she braced herself for whatever she might find inside. The door swung open to reveal a disheveled man in his mid-30s. Michael was tall and muscular, but his rough appearance, scruffy beard, worn-out clothes, spoke of someone who had been struggling for years. His eyes were suspicious, darting around as if expecting trouble. "Detective Carter, what do you want?" Michael's voice was harsh, his posture defensive. "I need to ask you a few questions about Michelle Henderson," Lisa said calmly, keeping her tone neutral. She knew she needed to tread carefully. Michael's temper had a history of flaring up unexpectedly. "What about her?" Michael snapped, his arms folding over his chest. "She's the one who left me, not the other way around." "I'm investigating a medical incident involving her," Lisa replied, trying to gauge his reaction. "A used condom was found inside her, and she mentioned your name." Michael's eyes narrowed. His lips twitched, but he said nothing. Lisa could see the wheels turning in his mind as he processed the information. Was he guilty, or was he just trying to protect his past? "Look, I don't know what she's been telling you, but I haven't been in her life for years. I moved on." "And anyway, what's it to you?" Michael shot back, his voice tight with anger. Lisa stood her ground. "We're trying to piece together the timeline here, Michael. You were close to her once, and we need to know everything. How much contact you've had with her recently, where you've been, and why you might have come back into her life now." Michael's jaw tightened. There was a long pause before he spoke again, but this time his tone was different. "I didn't do anything. You can search my place if you want, but I'm not the one you need to be looking for." "Then who?" Lisa asked, her patience beginning to wear thin. Michael took a step back and let out a bitter laugh. "Pastor Jamal," he said, almost mockingly, "if you really want to find out what's going on with Michelle, look at him. He's not as perfect as everyone thinks." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected there was something more to the story than just a wife's infidelity or a medical anomaly. But hearing Michael implicate Jamal in the same breath raised the stakes. Was there a connection between the pastor and his wife's ex-lover? Had Jamal known about Michelle's past and tried to cover it up? Or was he somehow involved in the mystery unfolding around Michelle? Lisa wasn't ready to make any conclusions just yet, but the new lead was too significant to ignore. She thanked Michael for his time and left the apartment, her mind swirling with new possibilities. Back at the station, Lisa reviewed her notes, her thoughts racing. She needed to talk to Jamal. The pastor might have more to hide than anyone realized, and she couldn't afford to overlook him. The investigation had taken a dark turn, and with every new revelation, Lisa felt the weight of the truth getting closer. She was starting to uncover the truth about Michelle's past, Jamal's secrets, and Michael's role in all of this. But the real question remained: how far was someone willing to go to protect their perfect image? And could the truth be buried deep enough to lead to murder? Detective Lisa Carter couldn't shake the suspicion that had settled in her gut after her conversation with Michael Simmons. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the case was no longer about a simple medical mishap. There were deeper, more disturbing questions at play here. Questions that threatened to unravel the lives of everyone involved. It was time to speak with Pastor Jamal Henderson. If Michelle's ex was to be believed, Jamal's connection to this case was more significant than Lisa had initially thought. She had already gathered that Jamal was a respected figure in the Atlanta community, but his role in Michelle's life and their marriage needed to be examined more closely. Lisa wasn't sure if he was directly involved in the situation, but she had learned over the years that even the most pious individuals could hide secrets. The following morning, Lisa made her way to Grace Community Fellowship. The church's towering steeple loomed over the neighborhood like a symbol of authority and righteousness. It was hard to reconcile the image of the community's pillar of faith with the shadows of suspicion that now surrounded Jamal Henderson. She was greeted by the church secretary, a polite woman named Sarah, who seemed visibly nervous when Lisa requested to speak with the pastor. "Pastor Henderson is very busy," Sarah said, wringing her hands. "But if you could come back later—" "No, I need to speak with him now," Lisa replied, her voice firm but not unkind. "It's a matter of urgency." Sarah hesitated but then nodded, leading Lisa down a long hallway to Jamal's office. The door was slightly ajar, and Lisa could hear the soft murmur of a conversation inside. When Sarah knocked gently, Jamal's voice called out from within. "Come in." The office was immaculately kept, much like the church itself. Jamal sat behind a large wooden desk, his posture straight and confident. He was dressed in his usual attire, sharp suit, polished shoes, and the calm demeanor that had made him a beloved figure in the community. But when he looked up at Lisa, she saw something flicker in his eyes, something guarded, something he didn't want her to see. "Detective Carter," Jamal said, his voice warm but strained. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I'm investigating a serious matter involving your wife, Michelle Henderson," Lisa said, cutting straight to the point. "I need to ask you some questions, and I hope you'll cooperate." Jamal's smile faltered just for a moment before he composed himself. "Of course, I'll do whatever I can to help. You must understand, Michelle and I are going through a difficult time right now. She's been ill, and it's been hard for both of us." Lisa nodded, sensing the tension in the air. "I understand. I'll be brief. Michelle has been experiencing some unusual medical symptoms. Dr. Moore found a used condom inside her during an examination, and it's raised a lot of questions. I need to know if you've been aware of any unusual circumstances in your marriage." Jamal's face paled, and for the first time since Lisa entered, his composed exterior began to crack. He cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair. "What are you implying, Detective?" "I'm not implying anything yet," Lisa replied. "But I do need answers. Is there anything you know about Michelle's past? Any individuals she might have been in contact with recently?" Jamal's jaw tightened. "My wife's past is hers, Detective. She's not the person she was before we got married. We've been through so much together. The church, the community. Michelle has been a rock." Lisa wasn't buying it. She could see the defensive posture in his body language. It wasn't just concern for his wife that made him react this way. It was something more. "Have you had any contact with a man named Michael Simmons?" she asked bluntly, watching Jamal's reaction carefully. The change in his demeanor was immediate. His face flushed with anger, and his hands clenched into fists on the desk. "What does he have to do with this?" Jamal snapped, his voice rising in a way that betrayed his calm facade. "Michael Simmons is part of Michelle's past, a part of her life that has no place in our marriage. He's nothing but a bad memory." Lisa studied his reaction closely. The anger, the defensiveness. He was hiding something. "I see. Well, Michael says otherwise," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "He seems to think you might be more involved in this situation than you're letting on." Jamal's expression darkened, but he forced a smile. "Let me make this clear, Detective. My wife and I are fine. Whatever happened in the past is over. I've moved on, and Michelle has too. If someone is trying to sabotage our lives, then you need to find out who that is, because it's not me." Lisa didn't buy his story, but she had no hard evidence to pin on him yet. There was no indication that Jamal had any direct involvement in Michelle's medical situation. However, his reaction to Michael's name, his quick defensiveness, those were things she couldn't ignore. "I'll be in touch, Pastor Henderson," Lisa said, standing up. "If you think of anything that could help this investigation, don't hesitate to reach out." Jamal stood as well, offering a handshake that seemed more like a gesture of politeness than genuine sincerity. "I will, Detective. Thank you." As Lisa walked out of his office, she couldn't shake the feeling that Jamal was hiding something deeper than he was letting on. His reaction to Michael's name had been telling, but it wasn't enough to implicate him directly. She would need more. Back at her car, Lisa reviewed the case in her mind. She still needed to investigate Michael further. She had already learned that he had been a controlling presence in Michelle's life, and it seemed that he had never truly disappeared from the picture. But there was still one nagging question that Lisa couldn't shake. Why had Michael come back now? What had he been hoping to achieve? And more importantly, was this tangled web of past relationships and hidden motives about to spiral into something much darker? The pieces were slowly coming together, but Lisa knew there was still a long road ahead. The truth was buried beneath layers of lies, and as she pulled away from the church, she couldn't help but feel that it was only a matter of time before someone would do anything to keep it hidden, even if that meant murder. Detective Lisa Carter spent the next few days working through the investigation with a renewed sense of urgency. The more she learned, the more complicated the case became. Pastor Jamal Henderson's defensive reaction to Michael Simmons and his strange response to her questions had convinced Lisa that he was hiding something. Whether he was directly involved or just trying to protect someone, Lisa couldn't say yet. But there was no denying that Jamal was at the center of a very tangled web. Michelle Henderson's past with Michael, combined with her recent symptoms and the shocking discovery at the hospital, had taken the investigation into murky waters. And yet, there was still something about this case that didn't sit right with Lisa. Why hadn't Jamal mentioned Michael's name before? Why had he been so quick to dismiss the connection? And more importantly, why had Michael resurfaced after all these years? Lisa knew that to get closer to the truth, she needed to dig deeper into the history of Michelle and Michael's relationship. And perhaps more importantly, she needed to speak with Michelle again. The first conversation had been incomplete, and now Lisa realized there were more questions to ask. She needed to understand Michelle's side of the story, her relationship with Jamal, and how Michael fit into everything. Lisa called Michelle and arranged a meeting at the local coffee shop. When Michelle arrived, her face was drawn, her eyes tired, as though the stress of the past few days was beginning to take its toll. Still, she tried to muster a smile when she saw Lisa. "Detective, thank you for meeting me," Michelle said, sitting down across from Lisa. She looked uneasy, almost like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. "You don't have to thank me, Michelle. I just want to get to the bottom of this," Lisa replied, leaning forward slightly. "I need you to be completely honest with me. I know it's difficult, but this is the only way we can figure out what's really going on." Michelle nodded slowly, her hands trembling as she clasped them together on the table. "I've been trying to do that, Detective, but there's so much. I don't even know where to start." "Let's start with Michael," Lisa said gently. "You mentioned him before. You said you thought you had put him behind you. But now, with everything that's happening, it seems like he might have come back into your life. Can you tell me more about him? What was your relationship with him really like?" Michelle's face tightened at the mention of Michael's name. Her eyes flickered with a mix of fear and regret. And for a moment, Lisa wondered if Michelle might break down right there. "Michael was complicated," Michelle began, her voice shaky. "He was charming at first, you know. He made me feel special, but over time he became possessive. He didn't like it when I had my own life, my own friends. He was always there, always hovering. It got so bad that I had to end things with him. I couldn't breathe anymore." Lisa watched Michelle carefully, noting the genuine distress in her expression. This wasn't the reaction of someone who had been casually involved with a man. This was the reaction of someone who had been trapped, controlled, and ultimately freed. But there was something more, something Michelle wasn't saying. "I ended it with him, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But Jamal came into my life soon after, and I thought I was free from all that," Michelle continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But now I'm not so sure. Michael came back a few weeks ago. He found me, and that's when things started to get strange." Lisa's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean by strange? I started getting these messages, texts, voicemails," Michelle said, her voice trembling now. "They were from Michael. At first, I thought it was just him being crazy, but then they started to get darker. He was saying things only he could know. He threatened Jamal, said he would destroy everything I had if I didn't meet him. I blocked his number, but he kept finding ways to contact me. He even showed up at the church once. It scared me, Detective. It really did." Lisa could feel the weight of Michelle's words settling in. The pieces were beginning to connect. Michael had been stalking Michelle, perhaps not just out of obsession, but out of some deep-seated need to destroy her life. His threats were specific. He had threatened Jamal, and now Michelle was in the middle of a nightmare she couldn't escape. Did Jamal know about any of this? Lisa asked, her voice low. Michelle hesitated. "I didn't want to burden him. He had so much on his plate with the church and the community. I thought I could handle it on my own. But I should have told him. I should have trusted him." Lisa studied Michelle's face. There was something there, something that told Lisa that Michelle wasn't being completely transparent. There was guilt in her eyes, but it wasn't just about Michael. It was as if she was hiding something even more significant. "Michelle, I need you to think carefully," Lisa said softly. "Did you ever meet Michael in secret? Did you ever see him after you married Jamal? Anything at all that could explain why he's showing up now?" Michelle's eyes widened, and Lisa saw a flicker of something. Fear, shame, maybe even regret. For a long moment, Michelle didn't speak. Then finally she exhaled slowly. "There was one time," she whispered, "about a year ago. Jamal was away on a mission trip, and I met Michael. I didn't want to, but he showed up at my house. He said he just wanted closure, that he needed to talk to me. I let him in. We talked for hours, but we didn't. We didn't do anything. I swear, detective, nothing happened." Lisa's instincts were screaming at her. Michelle had let Michael back into her life, and now it seemed the decision was spiraling out of control. Whether or not they had rekindled anything physical, the emotional scars were evident. Michael's obsession with Michelle hadn't faded. It had only deepened. But there was still one crucial piece of the puzzle missing. Why had Michelle been in such pain? Why had Dr. Moore found a used condom inside her? Lisa left the coffee shop with more questions than answers. Michelle had been hiding something, perhaps not directly involved in her own physical pain, but certainly part of the chain of events that had led to this moment. And then there was the fact that Michael, this dangerous ex, had somehow become entwined in everything. As Lisa walked to her car, her thoughts raced. Jamal, Michelle, Michael. Everyone had a role to play. The investigation was growing darker with each passing moment, and now it seemed that someone was willing to go to extreme lengths to bury a secret that could tear apart everything they had worked so hard to build. In the back of her mind, Lisa had a sinking feeling. Murder was not just a possibility anymore. It was becoming an inevitability. Detective Lisa Carter's phone buzzed as she drove back to the precinct. It was a message from her colleague, Officer Jackson. He had been digging into Michael Simmons' background, and it seemed that he had turned up something interesting. Lisa quickly parked her car in the precinct lot and opened the message. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she read, "Found something on Simmons. His alibi doesn't add up. I suggest we have a sit-down with him." Lisa's pulse quickened. This was exactly the break she needed. For days, Michael Simmons had been the elusive thread in the case, the man whose motives were unclear and whose presence seemed to be the catalyst for everything that had gone wrong in Michelle's life. But now Jackson's discovery meant they could finally confront him with something tangible. She quickly called Jackson back. "Meet me at the office. We need to bring Michael in." An hour later, Lisa sat in the interrogation room at the precinct, flipping through the files on Michael Simmons. There was nothing overtly suspicious about his life. No criminal record, no serious history of violence. But there were gaps in his past, missing pieces that didn't seem to add up. Jackson walked in, holding a manila folder. He dropped it on the table with a heavy thud, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "Look at this," Jackson said, his tone serious. He pulled out a set of surveillance photos, each one showing Michael entering and leaving various locations. A private investigator's office, a few sketchy businesses around town, and, most notably, a photo of Michael entering a motel late at night, about a week before Michelle had started feeling the pain that led her to the hospital. Lisa stared at the photos. "This is it," she muttered. "He's been up to something." Jackson nodded. "He's been keeping secrets. I dug through his phone records, too. Looks like he's been in contact with someone, a man named Roy Fields. The weird thing is, Roy has a criminal record for violent offenses. They've been talking almost daily for the last few months." Lisa's mind began to piece it together. Michael's return to Michelle's life wasn't just about obsession. It was something far more sinister. He had been working with someone. Maybe they were planning something, or maybe Michael was being manipulated. Either way, it wasn't good. Lisa stood up abruptly. "Let's bring him in." Now Michael Simmons was led into the interrogation room shortly after, his hands cuffed loosely. Behind him, he looked nervous, sweat beading on his forehead as he took a seat across from Lisa and Jackson. His eyes darted around the room, but he didn't speak. Lisa wasted no time. "Michael Simmons," she began, her voice firm, "we've been looking into your activities and we found some very interesting things. You've been visiting certain locations, meeting with certain people with criminal backgrounds. You've been in contact with Roy Fields. Care to explain?" Michael stiffened, but he didn't speak right away. His gaze dropped to the floor, and Lisa could see the guilt slowly creeping into his posture. He was trying to hold it together, but it wasn't working. I... I don't know what you're talking about, Michael stammered, his voice shaky. I've never met a Roy Fields. I don't even know anyone with that name. Lisa didn't flinch. She pushed the stack of photos across the table toward him. These say otherwise. We have you on camera, Michael. You were at that motel. And don't pretend like I don't know about your calls to Roy. You've been talking to him a lot lately. So why don't you stop lying and tell us the truth? Michael's face flushed. He looked up at Lisa with a mixture of fear and defiance. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice quieter now. Okay, I'll tell you. But you have to understand. I wasn't planning to hurt anyone. I just wanted her back. Lisa leaned forward, her tone unyielding. Who? Michelle? Michael nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. I know it sounds crazy, but I had to see her again. She's the one that got away. I couldn't just let her go. And when I saw her with Jamal, I couldn't stand it. He didn't deserve her. He wasn't right for her. Lisa's mind was racing. So you started stalking her again? Showing up at her church? Threatening Jamal? Michael's lips quivered, and he seemed to shrink in his seat. No, I didn't threaten anyone. I just wanted to talk to her. I didn't know who else to go to. I thought maybe if she saw me, remembered how it was, maybe she'd leave Jamal and come back to me. I never meant to hurt her. You're telling me you weren't the one sending those threatening messages? Lisa pressed. Michael hesitated. Not directly, but Roy was different. He didn't understand what I was going through. He thought Michelle had wronged me. I didn't want it to go this far. I tried to stop him, but Roy, he was like a bulldozer. He just kept pushing, kept telling me to take action. Jackson spoke up, his voice sharp. You've been involved with Roy Fields this whole time, haven't you? What's your connection to him? Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly struggling with his words. Roy's an old acquaintance. We used to work together back in the day. He's the kind of guy who gets things done, you know? But things got out of hand. I didn't know he'd go this far. Lisa narrowed her eyes. What do you mean, go this far? Michael paused, then exhaled, his shoulders slumping. Roy was obsessed with the idea that Jamal had stolen Michelle away from me. He thought we could ruin him, make him suffer. So we made a plan. A chill ran down Lisa's spine. What kind of plan? Michael looked up, his eyes glazed with panic. We were going to frame Jamal, make it look like he'd done something to Michelle, something she couldn't come back from. I thought it would force Michelle to come back to me. Roy kept telling me it would work. He said it was the only way to get what I wanted. Lisa felt her stomach churn. The plan had escalated. So you were trying to ruin your own wife's life for what? To force her back to you? Michael flinched, his face contorted with guilt. No, I never wanted to hurt Michelle. But Roy, he was a different story. He wouldn't back down. And now I'm afraid it's too late. Lisa stood up, her fist clenched. Roy Fields isn't just some guy you're talking about, Michael. He's a criminal, a dangerous one. And now someone's dead. You're telling me this whole mess was just about you getting Michelle back? Michael nodded, his eyes wet with shame. I didn't want this. I didn't know it would end like this. Lisa glanced at Jackson. This was the moment. The story had finally come out. It wasn't just obsession anymore. It was manipulation. And murder had been part of the equation all along. They weren't dealing with a simple love triangle. They were dealing with something far more sinister. Get Michael's full confession on record, Lisa ordered, her voice steady but tinged with anger. Then we go after Roy Fields. Detective Lisa Carter sat in her office, reviewing the confession she had just obtained from Michael Simmons. It was a detailed account of his obsession with Michelle, the influence Roy Fields had over him, and the twisted plan they had concocted to destroy Pastor Jamal Henderson's life. Michael's words still echoed in Lisa's mind, but there was something else, a nagging feeling that something was still off, like a final piece of the puzzle that hadn't clicked into place. The confession Michael gave was chilling, A plan to manipulate Michelle, to force her into a position where she'd have no choice but to return to him. Roy Fields, with his history of violence and manipulation, had been the catalyst, pushing Michael further into dangerous territory. But Lisa couldn't shake the sense that there was more to this story, something more significant that Michael wasn't admitting to. She had to keep digging. Just as she was about to call Officer Jackson to discuss the next steps in tracking down Roy Fields, her phone rang. It was Michelle Henderson. "Detective, we need to talk." Michelle's voice sounded urgent, her words rushing out in a near panic. "I think I know why this happened. I think I know what happened to me. And why?" Lisa's heart skipped a beat. She had spoken with Michelle before, but this call felt different. There was fear in her tone, but also something else. Guilt? Perhaps even an admission. Lisa grabbed her notepad and dialed Michelle's number, eager to get to the bottom of things. 20 minutes later, Michelle walked into the precinct. Her usual calm was gone, replaced by an anxious energy that made Lisa wary. She sat down across from the detective, wringing her hands together. "Michelle, what's going on?" Lisa asked gently, trying to coax her to open up. "What's this about?" Michelle took a deep breath before speaking, her eyes darting nervously. "I need to tell you something. I don't think Michael was the only one involved in what happened to me. It's not just him. It's me too." Lisa frowned, confused. "What do you mean? You told me everything last time. You said you didn't want him back, that you were trying to move on." Michelle's lips trembled as she spoke. "I lied. I didn't want to tell you the truth before, but now I have to. I didn't just meet Michael out of the blue. I reached out to him. I invited him back." Lisa's stomach dropped. This was not what she had expected to hear. "You what?" Michelle looked down at her hands as if ashamed to meet Lisa's gaze. "I didn't know how to handle what I was feeling. Jamal and I, things haven't been the same for a while. We were drifting apart. I wasn't happy. And Michael, he was the only one who ever made me feel special. I thought maybe, just maybe, he could help me figure out what I really wanted." Lisa sat back in her chair, absorbing the weight of Michelle's confession. "So you called Michael. You let him back into your life, even though you were married to Jamal?" Michelle nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes. I thought I could keep it all secret. I never meant for things to go this far. I swear, detective, I didn't want anyone to get hurt." Lisa felt the familiar anger rise in her chest. "But you didn't stop it, Michelle. You let him manipulate you. You let him come back into your life, and now everything's a mess. People are dead, and a man's life is ruined because of this." Michelle's eyes filled with tears. I know I'm guilty of a lot. But there's more. There's something else you don't know. Something I didn't tell you about my marriage." Lisa leaned forward, eager for more. "What is it? What haven't you told me?" Michelle took a deep breath. "Jamal, he's been hiding something. Something from the past. Something that connects all of this." Lisa's mind raced. "What are you talking about?" Michelle's voice trembled, but her next words hit Lisa like a punch to the gut. "Jamal isn't the man you think he is. I found out a few months ago, before Michael even came back. Jamal had been involved with Roy Fields before. Years ago. They were partners in some illegal business. I'm not sure what, but I found old paperwork, invoices, and a bunch of phone calls between them." Lisa's jaw tightened. This was the twist she hadn't expected. "You're saying Jamal knew Roy Fields?" Michelle nodded slowly, her eyes downcast. "I don't think Jamal was the person he was pretending to be. He'd buried that past, tried to forget it, but Roy never let him forget. I think Roy was blackmailing him, controlling him in some way. I don't know all the details, but I'm sure of this. Jamal knew what was going on. He was involved somehow." Lisa stood up quickly, her heart pounding. Everything was falling into place. Michelle's affair with Michael had been just one part of the story. The real danger was much deeper. Jamal had been hiding his own dark past, one that connected him directly to Roy Fields and possibly the murder of Michelle's friend. "Michelle, I need you to stay calm. I need you to trust me. I'm going to find out what's really going on, but I need you to stop hiding things. If Jamal is involved with Roy, I need to know the full extent of it." Michelle wiped her eyes, her voice breaking. I swear, I didn't know any of this until recently, but it's all connected. Jamal, Roy, Michael, they all have a part to play in this. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to trust. Lisa nodded, her mind racing as she processed everything Michelle had just revealed. If Jamal was involved with Roy Fields, if there had been a blackmail situation, then everything was far more complex than it first seemed. The murder wasn't just about Michelle's affair or Michael's obsession. It was about power, control, and deep-seated secrets that went all the way to the top. As Lisa walked Michelle to the exit, she felt the weight of the case pressing down on her. The pieces were finally falling into place, but the full picture was still incomplete. Roy Fields was the key, but there was something bigger at play, something that tied Jamal, Michael, and Michelle together in a web of deception and lies. In the coming hours, Lisa would have to make a decision. Was Jamal the mastermind behind the murder, or was he simply a pawn in a much larger game? Either way, she was determined to find out the truth. This case had started with a simple complaint about groin pain, but now it had become a complex web of betrayal, crime, and murder. And Lisa knew one thing for sure. No one was walking away from this unscathed. The truth was finally within her grasp, and it was uglier than she could have imagined. In the following days, Lisa and her team uncovered the full extent of Jamal's past connection with Roy Fields. The blackmail had been an ongoing operation, and it was clear that Roy had been using his power to manipulate both Jamal and Michael, pushing them to destroy each other. But in the end, it was Michelle's lies and complicity that had made everything spiral out of control. Jamal was arrested for his involvement in the illegal activities with Roy, and Michael was charged with the murder of their mutual acquaintance. The case was closed, but the damage to everyone involved would last far longer than any court sentence. As for Michelle, she was left to pick up the pieces of her life, knowing that her decisions had set off a chain of events that could never be undone. The truth had finally come to light, but at a steep price.